Great. Throughout this virtual town hall, we want it to be interactive. Please use the chat. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you haven't already written your name, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, we'd love to hear where you're coming from. And let's jump in. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. So my name is Taylor Jaffe. I'm Catskill Mountainkeeper's program manager. Catskill Mountainkeeper is an environmental advocate for the Catskill Park and region, and we anchor the ReThink Route 17 Alliance. So tonight we're very excited to be hosting this ReThink Route 17 virtual town hall. We're going to kick it off with a little bit of an overview of the project, the current project proposal. We're going to kick it over to some of our partners in the work, hear about what's at stake for our communities and our organizations. We're going to hear about how this relates statewide to a bigger push for transportation equity and accessibility across the state. We're going to talk a little bit about an alternate vision, and then we're going to end with an action that you all can take tonight. So again, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already, and let's jump in on the project. As we go through this, there will be some specifics. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. Some folks will be helping me monitor just so that way we catch any questions that might need an immediate response. So tonight, what we have been kind of casually calling the Route 17 project proposal. It is formally known as the Route 17 to I-86 Enhancements Initiative. And this is a project that is in both Orange and Sullivan counties, and it spans for about 30 miles. So you can see this green highlighted segment is where the current proposal is. The proposal used to be 45 miles all the way up to exit 103 in Monticello. But since folks have been on the scene, since folks in the Alliance have been on the scene, we've had the project area shortened. So 3 yips for that one. When we're talking about this project, we have a National Environmental Policy Act review, or a NEPA review, which is a 2-year process to better understand the environmental impacts. The agencies leading that review and leading this project are the New York State Department of Transportation, NYSDOT, and the Federal Highway Administration. This project was initially advertised as a highway expansion project. It's kind of been in the ether for years now. Folks have been talking about expanding Route 17, and certainly the corridor needs some work, but now the messaging is leaning further into upgrading the corridor to I-86. Highway expansion is still on the table, though, so we want to be very clear about that. Okay. There are 3 key causes for concern here when we're talking about this project. First, we want to efficiently spend $1.4 billion in our region to increase transportation outcomes. Second, there are climate impacts. If we're talking about expanding a highway, and when we were looking at the 45-mile section, it was projected that up to 2 million tons of additional greenhouse gas pollution was going to be emitted through 2050. And this is not compliant with the New York State Climate Act. We're also talking about protecting key ecological resources and disadvantaged communities. So here you can see we've got the Catskill Mountains and the Bashakil Wildlife Management Area, both important resources for us to protect for generations to come. And when we're talking about disadvantaged communities, here you can see the project area highlighted in yellow. And all of these purple areas are New York State identified disadvantaged communities. So a disadvantaged community is an area, a population that has been historically environmentally burdened. They've kind of seen first and worst of climate impacts, of environmental burdens, and or these are places that have different vulnerabilities that would make an additional environmental burden really worsen health and other impacts and outcomes in these communities. So when we're talking about, expanding the highway and inducing demand and creating worse traffic, worse air pollution, it would be within these disadvantaged communities, and that is also not compliant with the Climate Act. And we will get into that a little bit further. So let's talk a bit about the project background, give you some of the information that NYS has shared, and then we'll debunk some of that a little bit. So the stated project impetus is to alleviate congestion, improve safety, support economic development, and then meet current safety standards. Right now, the 17 Forward 86 is a registered 501c4, primarily funded by unions and lobbyists that would benefit from the widening, and this is the group that is primarily supporting the expansion. Governor Hochul has also been supporting the expansion so far, and it is up to us to change her mind, change that tune. And so far, the pro-expansion arguments are that adding a third lane will solve congestion, will improve safety, support economic development, and magically improve climate. We will get into all of these. So, what are we actually talking about? Let's look at some of the proposed concepts. The first is a no-build alternative. So this would mean that along the area of Route 17, no improvements would be made to the corridor other than those that are already programmed and those that are in routine maintenance. There's also build alternative A, which would keep the 2 lanes as a main line with operational improvements, and it would also add auxiliary lanes and collector distributor roadways at 3 locations. And so this would increase capacity along Route 17. There's also build alternative B, which includes adding a general use third lane for about 20 miles. That would mean we'd have a 6-lane superhighway for about 20 miles along Route 17. This would be from exit 120 in Middletown all the way to Harriman and I-87. This also includes collector distributor roadways. So I know this is a lot of jargon and some of this might not make total sense to folks. So let's take a look at what this would actually look like. This is a diagram of a collector distributor road. So here we'd have the 2 main line lanes, but as you can see, we're also adding additional lanes to get people on and off the highway. So we're talking about some additional paving here. And so in alternative A, the main line looks just like it does now, but we're adding capacity with these collector distributor roads and also with auxiliary lanes. So we're still paving here. And this would happen in 3 locations, which are close to I-87, over in Goshen, and then over in Middletown. That's build alternative A, which still adds capacity. Build alternative B is the proposal to turn Route 17 into a superhighway, adding a general use third lane for about 20 miles. And we're still talking about adding collector distributor roads. So there would be spots where, as you can see here, it's not just a 6-lane highway, but there would be 10 lanes across. And if you're familiar with Route 17, if you drive that, just think about how wide that area would be. Right now, we're used to, a regular 2-lane highway. Imagine 10 lanes plus shoulders across. We're talking about some serious impacts. And again, here in this purple, you can see where the general use third lane would exist. And those collector distributor roadways, those 10-lane segments, would be in Goshen and again in Middletown. So that is a little bit about what the project is about. But let's get into the math. Let's debunk it a little bit. If we're talking about alleviating congestion, 95.8% of the time, there actually isn't congestion on Route 17. And this is using the Department of Transportation's own studies. There's really not congestion that needs to be solved. There are certainly peak travel times, but again, 95.8% of the time, there's no congestion. And assuming we go through with build alternative B, we create a superhighway in some sections, 10 lanes across. After spending $1.4 billion to do all of that paving, drivers during a peak period could only expect to shave 3 minutes and 6 seconds off their trip, which, if you ask me, doesn't seem like a fair trade for $1.4 billion and all of the environmental and health consequences. We're also talking about widening a highway to alleviate congestion, but the prevailing science indicates that When you add lanes, you're going to induce demand and traffic will get worse over time. Some of our partners at Regional Plan Association put out a great report last January evaluating the Route 17 highway widening project. And it is well documented that highway widening creates more congestion. So while, say, at first, it's quicker to get through, there's no congestion, over time, people will say that there's no congestion, more people will drive, we will have more congestion than we initially started with, more cars on the road, more greenhouse gas emissions, more co-pollutants, all in those disadvantaged communities. We're talking about safety also, but something that the Department of Transportation doesn't really evaluate at all is the correlation between crash density and existing segments with a third lane. So you can see here, and it might be a little small for folks, but there is a correlation between where some of the highest crash density is and where there already are existing third lanes. And when there is a third lane, that adds an additional point of conflict for drivers. So it might just be that adding a third lane actually makes Route 17 less safe because there's that additional point of conflict and there could be more collisions. There's also a correlation between crash density and non-standard interchanges. However, there's no build alternative provided where the Department of Transportation just fixes these non-standard interchanges without adding capacity. And so we really want to be pushing for what the cost of that is and also what that would look like. Economic development. If we're upgrading to I-86, right now some exit closures are on the table at both exit 114 and 127. There's been talk of creating a warehouse corridor along Route 17, bringing additional trucking to the area. At best, this could just be an expensive handout to construction companies, to developers, the Jeff Bezoses. Meanwhile, our main streets would be closed off and folks would be driving through instead of to our communities. So that's a little bit about the project. We've gone through and kind of debunked some of the pro-expansion arguments. Let's talk about ReThink Route 17, this alliance and the campaign. So this is just a sample of some of our partner organizations, everyone from local to national, and we certainly want more folks to get involved. So you will see my email in the chat many times throughout this presentation, and I would love to connect with folks if they are wanting to join our alliance. Let's talk about the campaign. Our primary goal is to stop the highway expansion. Second, if there really is $1.4 billion on the table for this region, we want to divert that funding towards an alternative transportation vision that increases transportation equity and accessibility in the region, connects our communities, supports economic development, and aligns with climate and equity goals. We have a huge opportunity here. There's increased demand. More people are traveling to the Hudson Valley and Catskill region than ever before, but we also have disconnected communities. I'm in Livingston Manor right now, but if I wanted to get to Port Jervis, for example, I'm either walking 30 miles to Monticello or I'm driving, catching a ride, and then I'm going from Monticello all the way into Manhattan, Manhattan back to Port Jervis, but this is a 45-minute car ride. So we have disconnected communities and there really is an opportunity to get folks connected so we can get to school, work, Main Street that much easier. We also have our New York State climate goals. So the Climate Act mandates that greenhouse gas emissions reductions must be 85% below 2019 levels by 2050. We are currently not on track to meet that goal, but transportation is the second largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So if we're able to create an alternative vision that gets folks off the road and creates communities where we don't have to be so reliant on our cars, all across the state, not just here in the Catskills, we would be able to make a dent at that and really be able to get back on track. In terms of this campaign, I mentioned up front that we're in a NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act review. This is a 2-year process that the Department of Transportation goes through. Right now, they are developing a draft environmental impact statement. And so, something I want to flag for folks is that by the end of summer and early fall, we'll have a big moment for this campaign where they're going to release that draft environmental impact statement. And then we are going to have to take a look, review it, and then make our voices heard and make sure that it is reflective of our community's needs, and what is safe and responsible for our communities. So, I wanted to flag this timeline for folks. And really, the biggest question for us is what is the most efficient way to spend $1.4 billion? You know, right now, they're saying that half of this is going to come from the federal government, who really knows what's going to go on there. Half of it is supposed to come from the state. But if half of that is from our taxpayer dollars, we certainly want this to be spent the most efficient way. In the Hudson Valley, in our Department of Transportation region, 60% of the roads are poor quality. And instead of creating a wider highway on a highway that isn't currently maintained, instead of creating more work to maintain, which would cost taxpayers more, why don't we use that money to fix the roads we have first and then invest in a sustainable future for vibrant communities? So that is a little bit about the project, about where we're at in the campaign. This is my email. Again, it'll be in the chat in just a second. But I want to pause there. I'll stop sharing and see if we have a couple of questions. All right. And I am just going through the chat real quick. Awesome. And if anyone has a question, maybe you could use the Zoom to raise a hand. But if not, we can certainly keep moving right on. All right. I think no questions. So let's move on. We want to hear one question I got: what alternate transportation are you proposing? Thank you for this question, Janet. We will actually get into this a little bit in just a minute. So we'll come back to that question. But right now, I want to turn it over to some folks in the coalition to talk a little bit about how this is going to impact our communities. And first, I want to hand it over to Keith from For the Many to talk about his transportation story.
Hello, thank you all for having me. Yes, I've been in the labor field for about 30 years, and transportation has always been a hectic thing going to work, and especially in around Newburgh, where I mainly lived at the time. And you find that past 300, a lot of the buses don't go there. And if you're carpooling to work, you have to rely on one person's car. A lot of these jobs don't have shuttles. I've seen kids leaving Amazon, raining out, snowing out, it's dark out. Because they have no alternative, because Uber is like, $20 one way. You're up to like $160 just out there, just out of your travel. Cabs charge a crazy amount to even go outside of a town now. And one of my friends, Eric Jeter, one night he was walking to work. He was a father of two kids, and he was struck by a drunk driver who just didn't see him walking to work 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's stories like this where, like, bus transportation, bus stops, lit bus stops, protected bus stops, and all these areas are what's needed, instead of just laying more pavement, increasing the danger. We have animals crossing 2 lanes, and that causes a bunch of accidents. Imagine a deer trying to get across 10 lanes, and what kind of backup that would cause. So that's why I feel the need to come out and join the coalition and speak, and I hope that others will, so that other people don't have to risk their lives just to get to work. And thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Feel free, folks, use the chat, drop some love for this story. Really appreciate you sharing, Keith. And next, I want to pass it over to Mike Edelstein from Orange Environment.
Thank you, Taylor, for your excellent introduction and your words, Keith. So I'm a professor emeritus, retired from a 50-year college teaching career in which I taught sustainability and environmental studies, including environmental impact assessment, and spent a lot of time thinking about transit issues. 43 years ago, I helped create Orange Environment Incorporated to protect the ecological integrity of Orange County and the sustainability of its communities. Transportation has always been a major issue for us, and this is one of the reasons that I decided to call friends and initiate this wonderful coalition that we've built, which I'm very proud of all the work everybody has done. So the question, as Taylor posed it, is right on. How can we better spend this $1.4 billion where we really improve mobility rather than intensify traffic problems through widening and federalizing the Route 17 corridor? In Orange County, our main concern is that Route 17 is actually the main street of southern Orange County. It's a major corridor that people who live here rely on. And one of the things I learned from my research over the years is that when you mix through traffic and local traffic, it does not work very well for the communities. So we already have a situation in which we have disadvantaged communities along the highway corridor, and we know that they're already exposed to excess noise and air pollution, and that air pollution includes things like a lot of diesel fuel and other very dangerous air pollutants. So we already have a major air pollution problem and noise pollution problem along this corridor. We don't want to make it worse. We want to, in fact, see if we can use some of these funds to make it better. And this project will clearly, particularly if it becomes a federal highway, increase truck traffic coming through the corridor. This is a major concern. So the question is, can we solve our air pollution and noise problems while enhancing mobility along the corridor? And the switch to electric mobility is very key here because it would reduce noise and air pollution problems among addressing climate issues. Now, as Keith pointed out, Orange County is a transit desert. It is impossible to get anywhere without a vehicle if you're moving through the county. And our secondary road system is also inadequate. We have congestion in a lot of our communities because of that road system, and we need to improve those auxiliary roads. But the auxiliary roads that are proposed don't address that issue. They just widen the corridor. We've also a problem already with induced growth because of the prospect of widening the highway and the warehouse issue that Taylor Chaffee alluded to is already with us. We have a massive explosion of warehouses on the belief that this highway is going to be a federal highway and a widened highway. So we need to also address significant climate issues. And besides being compliant with state regulations, we need to deal with our resiliency. We have mobility issues tied to problems in our communities relating to flooding, to storms, to fire, and to heat. And we need to protect wetlands and create and protect buffer areas along the highways, in part to attenuate those problems. So how do we address all these problems? Will require this funding. It also will create lots of jobs, which I hope will address the need of the unions they're pressing for. So we can really turn this around, and this is actually an opportunity if we work together to capture funds to actually improve mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, for giving us that Orange County perspective and such a whole picture of what's possible. Up next, I would love to welcome Jessica Lansdale from the Lake Communities Alliance, and I am going to share share your slides real quick.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
Oh.
there we go.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jessica Lansdale. I am an architect. I've worked for the government as well for many years. I live in Wurtsboro and in New York City, and I'm the president of the Lakes Communities Alliance of Rock Hill. We're a group of citizens who got together right before COVID struck, I think, to keep an eye on our area and its development. It's because development in Sullivan County has exploded over the past few years. So Route 17, the Route 17 Alliance, I was interested in joining because Route 17 goes right through the area that the Lake Communities Alliance focuses on, which is that circle right there of lakes, the D&H Canal Reservoir lakes. And I also find it interesting that the Pell map showing the expansion, though it does end at exit 113, like Taylor mentioned. Sorry about my dogs. My husband just came home. Sorry. Yeah, just go back one. Yeah. So I find it interesting that that Pell map doesn't show the Bashkill, which is that long green swipe of parkland in there. That's one of the richest wetlands in the state of New York. It's incredibly biodiverse, off the charts biodiverse, tons of birds, tons of all sorts of flora and fauna. And it's also goes very close to the Neversink River Unique Area, which is to the left there. And it's also very, very close to these lakes that are man-made lakes that were used to feed the Delaware and Hudson Canal. So why don't you go to the next slide? So Route 17, no, go even more. Route 17 travels right through this area. You can see here that these are very important linkage maps that show how wildlife can travel, and from the Mongault Valley to the Catskill Park, goes all the way upstate. And then did that little piece there, the D&H Canal Reservoir Lakes area right there. If you go over there, you know, that's an area that we're hoping to make more green, not less green. The 17 travels across these biodiverse natural areas, and there's also the watersheds. The watersheds here flow into the Bashkill, and they flow into the Neversink River. Both are very pure, clean water sources. And the impact of having 17 expand in this area would increase impermeable surface area. It would elevate pollution. It would elevate noise levels for the communities, and it would be absolutely devastating to the spectacular diversity in these watersheds. You know, and the list goes on about the biodiversity, but let's talk about bald eagles. I mean, there's just tons of bald eagles in this area. You can skip the next one, go to the next one. And you can see from this map that that green is all the water, all the wetlands in our area that 17 is splitting. And there's now very strong wetlands regulations in place. And then go to the next. And this is a map that shows the biodiversity in the area. You can see that the deepest pink is the Bashkill. The lighter pink is rare plants and animals. That's the so that's the Bashkill there. You can see along the line of the Neversink, and the which is go to the left of Rock Hill. This yeah, right there. Yeah, so there's a lot of biodiversity there too as well. So we're very concerned that Route 17 will have a detrimental impact on the ecological sensitive areas of Sullivan County. Now, Taylor did say that this section of Sullivan County is not in this proposal, but it could be very well in the next proposal, because if they want to create an interstate, they have to upgrade, using that word lightly, they have to do work on 17 in order to connect it to the routes to the west that are already converted into interstate. And once an internet designation goes on the map, then all the truck drivers will know it's there, and they'll all be traveling there. So we're opposed against it. We're standing strong, hopefully trying to find another way to protect Sullivan County. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Really, really important to get those maps and take a look at our important ecological areas. Finally, I want to pass it over to Damon from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. That's good. I'm just going to talk really quick about New York's Climate Act. It's pretty relevant to this case, and I figure it's probably good for people to know about it. It's considered the most leading, most ambitious climate and environmental justice law in our country because it requires very hard reductions in greenhouse gas emissions across our and also recognizes that climate change is fundamentally an environmental justice issue, which contains critical protections for that are identified as communities, which we've mentioned a couple times already here. And there are two sections that are especially relevant to this project. The first being Section 7.2, which states that all state agencies, including the Department of Transportation, have to consider if any of their decisions are consistent with or will interfere with the state's greenhouse gas emissions attainment goals, which are, like I said, very ambitious. So if there's any project that potentially will be going against the idea that they need to be limiting their greenhouse gas emissions, the agency needs to give a very detailed, strong justification as to why they still need to go forward with this project. They also, if this justification is deemed sufficient, need to come up with a comprehensive list of greenhouse gas mitigation plans to offset any potential emissions increases. And despite the fact that the Department of Transportation claims that widening the highway will decrease traffic, like Taylor mentioned, this proposed project is an expansion and can be expected to induce hundreds of millions additional vehicle miles traveled annually, and will likely lead to an estimated total increase of around 2 million tons of GHG emissions by 2050, based on highway calculations. And despite all this, DOT has still not completed the legally required climate screens while still trying to go forward with this project. So it's something that everyone needs to keep in mind during this environmental review process. The second section that's actually very important as well is the Section 7.3, which states that all state agencies need to abstain from making decisions or issuing permits for projects that disproportionately burden New York's disadvantaged communities. This assessment is supposed to be both specific to the area and focus on both the environment, the health, and the quality of life of all the nearby residents. And if any potential agency action is found to increase the environmental or climate burdens of a DIC, it must propose alternatives that don't result in a disproportionate burden for the community. So if the pollutants are meant to go up or found to go up in an area, they should not be able to just go forward with a project, especially if it's running through DICs. And again, in this case, like we mentioned, Route 17 will pass through at least 9 disadvantaged communities. And there's been no reassurance from Department of Transportation that will follow Section 3 whatsoever, by considering the potential harms to surrounding communities. And moreover, the agency hasn't shown much consideration for the alternative transportation solutions that have been brought up so far. That all is to say that despite being the third most well-funded agency in our state, as well as the agency that regulates a state transportation sector that emits greenhouse gas levels comparable to many small countries, the New York Department of Transportation has essentially disregarded the mandates of the leading climate law in the state or in the country. And it was put in place to protect our communities, specifically our DICs, which this project very closely touches. And that's why meetings like this town hall are so important, because if there ends up being agency action to challenge, or they have fully disregarded these state environmental protections, we will need the involvement of community members through organizing and public comments, and public hearings to shed light on and push back against any illegal actions by these government agencies. and prevent any unregulated, potentially dangerous projects from just continuing on with no foresight as to what impacts they will have on the community, because this is entirely against the laws of our state. So thank you very much for coming, and please stay in touch and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions, and stay tuned going forward. I'll drop my email in the chat.
I was on mute. Thank you, Damon. Really appreciate that, and appreciate you sharing sharing your email with folks. Awesome. Really appreciate all of our Alliance members who just spoke. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for educating us further. I'm now going to hand it over to Lizzie from New Yorkers for Transportation Equity to kind of bring us to the statewide level.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so, like, when I think about the Catskills, when I think about the Hudson Valley, and I think about how beautiful it is, and I really appreciate Jessica's presentation, which really grounded us in the exquisite biodiversity of the region, our important waterways, our wetlands, and our watersheds, which of course is incredibly important for the rest of New York. And I really appreciated Keith talking about workers, right? Just being able to get around. And of course, if you're walking along the side of a road without a street light, and there are no buses at 10 at night or 3 in the morning, then yeah, you're at a higher propensity to be hit by a car. And so we want at New Yorkers for Transportation Equity, we want to end highway hegemony once and for all. As we know, Governor Hochul, or should I say Highway Hochul, loves building highways. She thinks this is the answer to all of her problems. But Route 17, it's not alone, right? This is a $1.6 billion boondoggle, as Taylor keeps calling it a boondoggle, but there are a lot of boondoggles all across the state. There's one in the Bronx. There's one in between Queens and Brooklyn. There's the boondoggle tunnel in Buffalo. Like every single time, their communities are asking for increased public transit, more reliable buses, more accessible stations. Highway Hochul is insisting on expanding highways instead. And each highway costs about $1 billion. I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. So we here want to end highway hegemony once and for all. And that's why we're advocating for the Get Around New York Act. As we know, there's a sort of deep history of highway harms that have segregated communities and worsened racial and economic inequality in cities all across the state, from Buffalo to Syracuse to the Bronx. And so we want New York State to reduce vehicles on the road by 20% by 2050 to adhere to our climate goals, as we were just talking about. This will reduce emissions, it will reduce pollution, it will also save us a lot of money. And instead of expanding a highway and spending billions of dollars, we want New York State DOT to spend that money on, drumroll please, on buses, on bike lanes, on sidewalks, on trails, and on, densifying our downtowns and making our main streets more walkable. We also need to be preserving our green spaces, especially our wetlands, our forests, especially in the Catskill region, which is uniquely beautiful. So we're advocating for the Get Around New York Act, which will require DOT to reframe the way they spend their money. It will actually save the average family on about $3,000 a year if New York State passes this bill, because it will be instead investing in public transportation. It will create tons of jobs, more sustainable jobs, because after you build a highway, the unions always talk about jobs, but once you build a highway, that's it. There are more jobs created through public transportation, through public sector jobs. And it also offers us more choices to get around. And this works. I want to talk a little bit about Colorado, because In 2022, Colorado also passed a VMT reduction bill, like the Get Around New York Act. And this bill, also required Colorado to decrease the amount of vehicles on the road. And you know what Colorado did? They shifted $1.5 billion away from expanding highways because they were about to expand one too. And instead, they built 5 bus rapid transit corridors and, invested in dozens of new bike lanes and sidewalks because they freed up $1.5 billion. They also upgraded bus rapid transit corridors with more transit priority lanes so that those buses would go really fast, and increased reliability. This actually, if you build it, people will ride it. Is true. Like if you have more reliable buses, more people will ride the bus. And so Colorado is expecting to see an increase in daily ridership by 68%. This can happen in the Catskill region too. Our regions all across the state are very disconnected. And of course, the new BRT corridors will reduce the annual amount of vehicles on the road, and it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that reduction is almost like canceling the expansion altogether. And I thought this was I think this is great comms for Colorado DOT, but they have a intercity bus system called Bustang, which I think is adorable. And they're going to double service, right? So you can get from Denver to Colorado Springs. And if you have more intercity buses, instead of driving, people are just going to take the bus because it's more convenient. And of course, they invested in waterfront development, multimodal transportation. And so these are all options that are available to us if we stop sort of reflexively investing in highway expansions and shifting our framework to be investing in public transportation, decreasing the amount of private vehicles on the road, and expanding public transportation, improving our sidewalk infrastructure, improving our green spaces, and densifying our cities instead. So I want to encourage everyone to join the fight to block Route 17, but also join us to advocate for the Get Around New York Act so we can have stop highway expansions overall in New York State, and make sure that everywhere across the road, everywhere across the state, we can have all of these wonderful things. And thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. JMS, I see a hand. Do you have a quick question before we move on to our alternate vision?
Hi, yes, thanks for calling on me. My name is Jonathan. I live in Brooklyn, but have been going up to Livingston Manor for the past 25 years. And so I've been excited to go up there and love driving up Route 17. I am a traffic engineer and a civil engineer, so this is all as close to my heart in many ways. There's a lot of talk about buses, and I would like to throw a fact in here with my question that Sam Schwartz, who was the previous commissioner to the New York City DOT, he has a book out called No One at the Wheel, and he says that rural bus routes is a great place to test out autonomous vehicles. One, the roadways are forgiving in terms of the complexity and traffic. And two, the pavement markings are actually in good condition and typically quite wide. So it's a great test bed for autonomous vehicles, and that's a whole nother debate.
Thank
But
you.
as we see the development in the Catskills and upstate New York, a lot of the people who are moving up there are young families, many of which have a tendency to prefer public transit. But on the architecture side and the development side, many of the people who choose to have a single family home want their own driveway to go to. Has the true appetite for public transit and buses been studied in Sullivan County? Is it truly realistic that people will change their modes?
That is a great question. Thank you. And that is something that we would love to find out a little bit more about. There's certainly a transit desert out here. We need more transportation. Right now, Sullivan County has started Move Sullivan, and it's looking to expand. So there's certainly appetite for increased mobility, increased and accessible mobility. However, it would also be great to do a transportation study. And that is something that would cost a lot of money to do well. And that's something that we should be asking of our Department of Transportation. Jessica, I also see your hand. I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to move us. First, thank you, Lizzie. And she's got in the chat a link that you can send a letter to your legislator and ask them to support the Get Around New York Act. And so right now I'm going to transition us back from statewide to a little bit more focused. And I'm going to pass it over to RF Khan to talk a little bit about an alternate vision.
Sure. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Taylor, and thanks everyone else. And thanks, Lizzie, for queuing up alternatives, because I think we're all thinking, okay, $1.4 billion, it's a huge amount of money. This is a terrible project, but what else? And I think Michael touched upon some of those options. And actually, I think it was John who was making the comment about transit. So hopefully I can address that. But first, my name is RF Khan. I live in Ulster County, and I became aware of this proposal a few years ago. And I'm someone who drives Route 17 regularly every week to visit my mom in Rockland County. And I wasn't thinking of the environmental aspects of this project, but I was thinking, what an utter waste of money. Like I drive it every week. There's not congestion. At the time, it was $500 million was the proposal, and I thought, well, that's a huge waste of money because of the opportunity cost of what else could we be doing. And so it just struck me as a boondoggle. And then I looked into the history of it, and sure enough, it was a boondoggle. So let's talk about vision. I've been tasked with coordinating a vision for this region of what we could do with this $1.4 billion. And the honest truth is I reached out to a bunch of transportation experts. I'm a transportation planner by background and education, but I reached out to the director of planning for Sullivan County, director of planning for Orange County, transportation specialists in the area. And we struggled to come up with enough projects for $1.4 billion. We just came up with enough projects for the 0.4. Granted, that is $400 million. That decimal and the 4 represents $400 million. So we've got a list of projects, and we'd love to hear your feedback if we're not. And we should be finished with this initial vision in mid-April. But I think before we talk about those projects, and I'll try to keep this short, but we should discuss what are our priorities in terms of transportation investments. And I think we can all agree that safety is the #1 priority. People should not be dying on our roads and just to get around, just to get to their job. But the reality is 3,000 people a month in the US die from car accidents. To put it in another way, that's a 9/11 every month of every year. And in New York State, I think it's 1,000 people are killed each year on our New York State roads. DOT is saying this is a safety project, but I filed a FOIL request because they don't publish their data on their website for some reason. So I filed a FOIL request to give me the top 20 most dangerous locations on our roads in this region. It covers Orange, Rockland, like this area. Not one of those 20 locations are on Route 17. So if you ask me as someone who should be prioritizing things, we should be focusing on where people are dying, where people, where lives could be saved. And that's on our local roads, not on Route 17. Another priority should be mobility. How do we get around? This, as Taylor mentioned, this project will not improve mobility, albeit for a few weekenders that travel westbound on Fridays on nice evenings in summer and fall, which is the time there's congestion. Maintenance. As Taylor mentioned also, 60% of our roads are failing. So there's huge potholes. No one likes potholes. It causes undue damage, causes accidents. There's a backlog that the DOT cannot keep up with. At the same time, they're proposing expansion. So we suggest maintenance first. And then we get to the environment and health, public health, like driving on roads and driving further distances, which is what this would induce, does not improve people's physical health or their mental health. We have, the physical aspects of driving, not healthy. There's also the social aspects of driving too. And we have, what's called a loneliness epidemic of social fabric breaking down in this country. And I think a lot of that is because of our reliance on automobiles, but this project will just increase reliance. And then we look at the impact on development. Wider highways causes sprawl development, lower density development, which does not support transit as well as higher density development. So that gets to Jonathan's point. And then we can look at the economics of it. Who will benefit from this? From the investment, $1.4 billion, the consultants and contractors that work on highways across the country surely will benefit. They are the number one beneficiaries. What we would love to see is more small businesses benefit. And small businesses benefit when you invest in downtowns, in our small towns, in our hamlets, on smaller projects that they can compete for, and that has knock-on effects for the businesses there. Not the warehouses, not the Jeff Bezos, who will benefit from, bigger, faster, whatever, wider. So yeah, priorities are like that. We have a list of projects. Someone mentioned the trails in Orange County. We could fund all the proposed trails in Orange County for $100 million. We could double bus service in Orange County and Ulster and Sullivan County for $20 million. We could fix all the potholes. We can do all this. Like I mentioned, we have a long list of projects that cover transit, maintenance, fixing bridges, bicycle, pedestrian, downtown redevelopment, and all of that adds up to $400 million. So if you have any other projects you want to see, especially big ticket items, share them with us, share them with Taylor, and we will put together this alternative vision that we will share with the governor. How's that?
Incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Really appreciate that. And I'm adding my email right here to the chat. And we would really love folks to reach out if there are projects in your area that would increase transportation, increase mobility, and are really likely going to be less than $1.4 billion. And so while we've got 5 minutes left, I want to get folks out by 7. I would love for us all to take action. And, we've kind of talked about a big next step for this campaign at the end of the summer, about 5 months from now. We are going to need to mobilize again, and we'll have to respond to the draft environmental impact statement. So that gives us 5 months right now to be talking to our legislators. We need to change the narrative. We need to talk to our neighbors and make sure that everyone knows that we don't need a wider highway. We need investment in our communities in better transportation. So we have an action for folks to take right now. And I just put in the chat a link for everyone to take a minute right now and email key legislators to stop the Route 17 highway expansion. This link will take you to an email action tool. And you should be able to send an email to all of the key legislators along the Route 17 corridor, telling them that wider won't work and we want an alternate transportation vision. So for the next minute or two, I'm going to go back to the nice music. Would love for folks to go ahead and use that action tool. And then after you send your email, drop an emoji in the chat, write done, let us know before we close out. Amazing. I see RF sent an email. I see Rosemary sent an email. Thank you, folks. Want to get you out. So send your email and feel free to drop. We are recording this. I will be sure to send this recording to the email list, along with our slides and other resources for everyone to take. Thank you for joining us tonight. Love to see these done. Love these emails sent. Thank you, everybody. We're definitely going to make an impact. Let's get in front of our legislators. Let's tell them that rider will work. Thank you. Amazing. Doing a lot of done.
All done. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
See ya.
Enjoy the evening. Hanging out for an extra second. So if anyone has a question, feel free to ask. You're very welcome, buddy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thanks for joining. Right, everybody. Thank you, Suhali. Thanks, Rob. All right, we are just at 7. Yes, Barbara, this recording will be available. I will stop as soon as we're done. And then I will be able to follow up with everyone who signed up for this webinar. And you will get all kinds of resources, including a link to the webinar recording. All right. Glad to see so many actions taken. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time. Again, my name's Taylor Jaffe. I will be reaching out to all of you, but again, my email is in the chat. It was great to have everyone. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the evening. Take care.